how can we not be pissed off when we see them coming after the workers who take care of our veterans, many of whom are veterans themselves? What are you hearing from your friends and contacts in the community, folks you serve with, folks who are out there? You've done so much over the years to advocate for veterans to get better care. We've seen growth in the VA. The PACT Act meant a lot more people are eligible for care, only to get this news that they're going to slash and burn so much of the VA. What are folks saying to you?
Well, you came on my show when it used to be called Angry Americans. Now it's called Independent Americans. And we used to say, if you're not angry, you're not paying attention. And I think that's how people feel right now. If you're not angry, you're not paying attention, or maybe you're complicit, which is some of the folks that are now working with the administration on this. I mean, it started really last year, Pete, for the people who know what's going on. They knew that the VA was going to be a big target for Elon Musk, for Doge, for Trump. They've talked about this for decades, and now it's kind of their demented extremist fantasy coming to life, where now they can send not even a meat axe. I had Senator Mark Kelly on my show this week, who's a Navy veteran like you, and he said, it's like a meat axe. I said, no, it's like a flamethrower. It's a flamethrower, and that flamethrower is now firmly focused on the Department of Veterans Affairs. They know it's symbolically important. They know that it employs hundreds of thousands of people. The budget is big, and it should be. And it's sacred and symbolic. And I think all of that may have had people worried last year. And the first folks I heard from, Pete, are my friends who work at the VA. And like you, I have so many of them. And they had this uncertainty and this instability. And even now, so many of them are just kind of waiting, checking their email to see if the Doge guillotine is going to drop on their inbox. So it's tremendous anxiety. And I liken it to being in the military. Like, they don't need this shit. They have a really important mission, and they should be focused on that. And the destabilizing effect is already hurting their morale. It's hurting their families. It's removing their focus. It's killing recruiting. Like, we're going to have a hard time recruiting at VA for a generation because of this kind of disruption. But I think the important insight, too, Pete, is that it's totally bipartisan. You're a Democrat. I'm an independent. People across the spectrum are furious. And I think that the Trump administration and the new VA Secretary Collins have kind of miscalculated here. I know some folks are beaten down. I know folks are frustrated. This could be a sign of hope, because veterans can be a core of the opposition to what's happening. The patriotic purged can be the core of the people who fight back, and I'm seeing that. I'm seeing people who are mobilizing, who are active, who are getting out in front. People who've never been involved in politics before think this is wrong and stupid and short-sighted and damaging and bad for not just our collective mental health, but even for our national security. So I think it's an opportunity for activation, and that's why I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. People are looking for leaders, and our veterans have always stepped up just like you have, and they're stepping up right now, man.
I'm so glad you said that. This could be an empowering moment for so many veterans, so many families, and so many Americans. I know there's this feeling that the news coming out of Washington is just steamrolling all of us. But the reality is they back down sometimes. A good example, they tried to freeze all the transportation funding, like all of it on day one. They gave up pretty quickly on that. So this is not some unstoppable force, especially when they hear from people. And I think there's a lot of folks in Congress who are incredibly nervous about this, a lot of congressional Republicans who know better, but are going to stand, or at least can be pushed to stand up to this sort of thing. And of course, one proof of that is the triumph of getting the PACT Act done in the first place. I remember you mentioning the contrast between what happened on the west front of the Capitol on January 6th and how horrifying that was for our country. And then what happened on the East Capitol when a bunch of veterans basically shamed Congress into doing the right thing, right? Do you just remind folks of that story and connect that to what's going on now? Because I think it's really important for folks to understand that, both as evidence that you, even in today's Washington, you can make change, and as just a specific example of what's at stake here when it comes to the PACT Act. Because from what I can tell, all the people that are going to fire are the people who would be getting more veterans signed up for care.
Yeah, I think the most important activists in American history have almost always been veterans, right? George Washington was the first guy who said, when we assumed the soldier, we did not lay aside the citizen. And he went from being, an active duty officer to president, and our last independent president, unfortunately, in my view. But every generation, from JFK to George Bush, they were involved in the military, and then they came home and led in politics and led in civil society, like you have. So I think we can hearken back to those things. And the reality is, Veterans have been fighting for their rights and for support from the beginning. And the PACT Act was a manifestation of decades of fighting. Vietnam veterans had to fight to have Agent Orange even recognized. And many of my mentors and friends have already died from Agent Orange exposure, toxin exposures. They dropped chemicals on these men and women and they got sick. Pretty basic. But they had to fight until really the PACT Act was passed to have proper support, recognition, and care. And that's what the PACT Act did. It expanded VA care for 1 million people, right? 1 million people from Vietnam to our time that were exposed to toxins, like me. I was in Iraq, I was in Kuwait, I was around burn pits. They burned tons of shit in the air, and we breathed it in. And I think for folks who maybe are still not wrapping their head around what this is like, let me give you a more immediate comparison. 9/11 exposures. Because I am right now just a couple blocks from Ground Zero where I served on 9/11 in the National Guard. We breathed in all that stuff. We got sick. Many of us have already died. And I think bringing this all back full circle, Pete, there's going to be a protest next Thursday because we're fighting again for 9/11 health support. They're trying to come after 9/11 health workers and cut the budget there as well. So we're going to rally on the Capitol on Thursday. And the insight here is that when veterans fight back, we often win, right? Jon Stewart had to go down there and shame them into passing the PACT Act. But what the PACT Act did was expand the services for people who are dying. It's pretty basic, right? Now what Collins, who is, in my view, a very radical, extreme VA secretary wants to do is he says he's chopping back to what it was before that time in 2019. But it's indiscriminate. There's no larger strategy. There's no goal. We don't know if there are more cuts coming, and I would anticipate that there are. But these cuts are going to be 83,000 VA workers scheduled supposedly for August. A quarter of everyone who works at the VA is a veteran. And it's not just them, Pete. This is why I think it's a much bigger issue. Because as you know, a third of every federal worker is a veteran. So what they're looking at doing is laying off potentially hundreds of thousands of veterans around the country. And we've worked for 2 decades not just to expand the PACT Act, but also to lower the veteran unemployment rate, which we finally got to a historic low of 4% last month. You know what's going to happen to that thing? It's going to get blown up because they're laying off hundreds of thousands of veterans. And really important, Pete, you're one of the smartest guys I know in politics. You're always thinking strategically. You offer solutions. They have no solution for what all these unemployed veterans are supposed to do. They're not offering them an off-ramp into another job. Elon Musk isn't hiring them at Tesla or SpaceX. So they're going to go out. And they're going to collect unemployment, right? So this is a really short-sighted, stupid thing. But I want to make a really important point, Pete. It's not about veterans because they don't care about veterans. They have a larger strategy to push forward a radical agenda to seize the powers of government and transform society in the way they want. Veterans are in the way. And what I want folks who are listening to remember, this is how they're treating retired generals. This is how they're treating veterans. They started with us. How do you think they're going to treat everyone else? How do you think they're going to treat you? Because that's what's coming next. And that's why I hope that this can be an alarm bell that activates people from their depression and get out from under the covers. We need you to fight. This is an important time. And this is a really important crossroads for us to take a stand.
Exactly right. I mean, we got to resist this urge to tune out, right? And I get it. Like we got, your kid is sick. You got other things to do.
Yeah.
It's already been exhausting to watch the news for the last few years. Now we're in this moment where it just feels like every time you check your feed, every time you open the news, every time you watch TV, it's punching you in the face. But this is an opportunity to stand up and fight back. People respond when veterans stand up. People across the political spectrum get it. There is, I mean, I grew up in a country where the one thing we could all agree on is a sacred duty to take care of veterans, and they're going right at the heart of this. And I think you're right. This is part of a design. This is part of a radical ideology. This isn't normal Republican or normal Democrat stuff. This is something that really is next level destructive. And I'm also glad you mentioned solutions, because let's be clear, shaking things up at the VA, I think in many ways is something you and I are both very supportive of, right? Of course, there need to be changes. It needs to be modernized. There's been a lot of progress the last few years. There's a lot more to do. I think everybody gets that. I think they're trying to hide behind that a little bit to say, oh, yeah, we're just reforming it, making it more efficient. But they can't even explain to the people they already fired why they fired them, right? Other than because they can. It wasn't that they weren't doing a good job. It wasn't that they systematically analyzed, their positions and said this one's more important than that one. We saw the same thing at the FAA. They just fired everybody that they could on day one. Now they're going after tens of thousands of more workers later on this year, and there's just no way you can do that without having an impact on the services people count on every day. So I think a lot of people watching this right now are saying, okay, so what do I do? Like, how do I do something about it? And to me, I mean, first of all, it sounds old fashioned, but it really does matter when you call your member of Congress. I mean, we're doing it right here in our district. I think wherever you live, frankly, especially if your member of Congress is in the same party as the president, you can make your voice heard, and that matters. You mentioned this protest going on about 9/11 responders and their care being at risk. I think it's great to know there are opportunities to get offline, on the streets, in person, do something else about it. What else do you think people can do to make sure their voices are heard at a moment like this and stop this injury to American veterans from happening?
I think the smart thing to do to start, and I said this in my podcast this week, is brace yourself for a long fight. Get your mindset in a place where we are basically going to go through, however long or short it is, kind of a Great Depression, a new Great Depression, a cultural, political, artistic, moral Great Depression. And we're going to have to fight through it. It's going to be long. It's going to be hard. It's going to suck. There are going to be casualties, but we have to keep our eyes on the prize and know that we can weather the storm, and there will be a better day for America. I think that's important because you got to get through the ups and downs that will inevitably come. Right? And then you've got to focus on understanding the larger strategy. And this is a radical strategy because I'm an independent, Pete. I've worked with Democrats and Republicans. I've seen the far left liberals like Bernie Sanders who wanted to make VA care the norm for all. And I've been critical. I said he apologized too often for the VA. And then I've seen the right wing, which was led largely by Pete Hegseth for a long time when he ran a group called Concerned Veterans for America that had a different, more radical ideology of breaking down the VA, privatizing the shit out of all of it, and making it their proof of concept for what they want to do with America. Most Americans are in the middle, Pete. Most Americans are moderate. Most Americans want practical solutions. And I think that's where we have to sit. We have to focus on that and calling it out for what it is. Recognizing also, if I had to predict, Pete, they're going to fire these 83,000 people, right? And they're probably going to fire more. And what we have to think strategically about is how to support them, right? Fight them as hard as you can in the 5-meter target, but also support these vets who are coming out. And that means moral support, the community wrapping around it, whether it's your church group or your school, helping them and their families, providing them opportunities for employment, making sure that reasonable people in Congress offer them unemployment, other types of support, and then join the fucking movement, because this is gonna be the movement. Not just vets, but retired people from the military, people like C.Q. Brown who just got fired, all the generals at the Pentagon, the FBI agents. The patriotic purge are gonna be the foundation of what I think is a very moderate, reasonable, patriotic opposition. So when you see veterans protests start to unfold, which they will, I think there's gonna be some as early as next Friday in the Capitol and around the country. When you see veterans protesting at Tesla dealerships, that's going to happen pretty soon, I guarantee you. Join that movement. And for the veterans themselves, I'm going to tell you, we need you. And I'm running a new group now called Independent Veterans of America. We are recruiting, training, and supporting independent veterans to run for office. So if you are, like most of the country, half of the country, that's not a Democrat or Republican, or you're a Democrat or Republican that has had it with the parties and wants to run as a patriot, not as a partisan, we're recruiting. From Senate all the way down to school board. We ran 11 candidates last year, supported folks like Dan Osborne, who many folks saw in Nebraska almost take out a radical Republican, Deb Fischer. But we have folks who are running all over the country, and we need you. Get involved. We need your leadership at the school board level, for Congress, for Senate, and maybe even one day to challenge you for president, Pete, if they run. Maybe it'll be your running mate or vice versa. But I think we have to have a long-term view, right? This has to be almost like the anti-war movement, Pete. I think that's a parallel here. And I don't think the leaders are going to come from Washington. It's not going to be a congressperson or a senator. It's going to be the next John Kerry. It's going to be the next Bobby Mueller. It's going to be the next civil rights leader that emerges from young people or from the purge that are going to seize this moment. And we got to support those leaders. That's the last point. You got, when those courageous leaders like you and so many others step forward, we got to have their back, because it's not easy. It's dangerous. It's scary. And we got to make sure we protect them as a community.
I'm so glad you said that. I think fierce opposition when people are doing the wrong thing, positive reinforcement, especially, frankly, when you think about how much pressure will come on any Republican or independent who tries to do the right thing and stand up to this, as well as being there for Democrats who are standing up to this, because this is not a Democrat-Republican thing. Although I will argue why, you know, my party has put forward better answers than any of this Project 2025 stuff. But the bottom line is patriotic opposition is, I think, the thing I'm really going to take away from this. So we got to wrap. I know you're taking care of a sick kiddo. I got to take care of something else here at the house, but really glad that we had this conversation. I'm going to post this to my profile. Folks can get more information in links about some of those calls to action that we talked about. Paul, thanks for everything you're doing for this country.
I want to thank you. Every time that you've been on my show, I've thanked you for this, and I want to thank you again. You know, you are a role model for our children, and you're a great patriot. And, you know, the politics in times like this, your political affiliation is so secondary to your patriotism. But for year after year, you continue to represent the best of what America is all about. And our kids so badly need leaders they can look up to right now. And you have been that. Your family has been that for years now. And that's a tremendous sacrifice. Leadership is about sacrifice. And I want to thank you for your personal sacrifice. But most of all, man, for your personal example. You're a great American. And we need you now more than ever.
Well, I'll keep trying to live up to that. Appreciate it. Thanks for everything you're doing. Thanks for today.
Thank you,
Glad we got
brother. Appreciate it, man. Take care, everybody. Thank you for tuning in.